Thank you for your attention. We are very pleased to be here because it's a very interesting occasion in order to rethink a lot of questions that we met in our studies. The topic we have chosen is the Slav Congress through the prism of Italian history and historiography, because the two aspects are closely intertwined. We conceived the paper and we wrote the paper together, so it's very difficult to split it in two parts, and I take advantage because I am a woman and my voice today is quite low to give the honor to read the paper to Antonio D'Alessandri that will expose our common results. So Antonio, please go on, and after we can jointly answer to all the questions arising.
Yes. Thank you everybody. We propose some points on the Italian historiographical tradition, on the political and cultural relations between the Italian national movement and the peoples of Central and Eastern Europe during the 19th century. Together with Julia, we thought it might be useful to share the significance and the results of that historiographical tradition today for a quite simple reason. Both Italy and the countries and peoples of Central and Eastern Europe were in the same period facing an unsolved national question. Certainly very different from one context to another, but united by aspirations to create an alternative and different Europe, made by civic communities founded on the rights of nations and individual liberties. This gave birth to many projects, collaborations, meetings, but also clashes and divisions. Different were the attitudes of the protagonists, and dissimilar were the visions of political change that were acknowledged and promoted. This was linked to a decisive problem, namely the relationship with the Austrian Empire, which had different political consequences for the Italians and the peoples of the empire. For the Slav nations, furthermore, as we know, there was an additional problem, largely absent in the Italian case: the relations with Russia. Finally, within the Habsburg monarchy, there was a further level of internal dissension, in which we find an overlapping of national and social elements. The relationship of the Slavs with Germans and Magyars. The Slav Congress in Prague attempted to find an answer to this complex grid of problems. In the European climate of '48, it was inevitable that the echoes of the Congress would also resonate in Italy. Historiography has, however, recalled that it was not huge, this echo. The reason for this lies precisely in the different attitude that Italians and Slavs had towards the Habsburg monarchy. Consequently, Austro-Slavism did not fit well to the political and military conflict of the Kingdom of Sardinia with Austria. For the Turing government, it was necessary to establish alliances with those forces that opposed Vienna, such as the Hungarians, for example. And the significance of the Slav Congress in Prague, according to Angelo Tamborra, a leading exponent of a long tradition of studies of Eastern Europe, a long tradition of studies in Italy, with many colleagues which are also connected to the Commission of Slavic Studies. According to Tamborra, the significance of the Congress was more from a political point of view, but rich from a cultural one. In short, writes Tamborra in his masterly work Central Eastern Europe in 19th and 20th centuries, I see him, the sense of solidarity of all Slavs was strengthened by the Congress. This was ultimately the only real, though certainly unconscious, result of the Prague Slav Congress, where too many confused desires and aspirations were mistaken as realities, already historically mature and easy to reach. The voice of Italy, not yet united, was expressed by Giovenale Vegetzi Ruscalla. He was an intellectual from Cavour's circle of liberal moderate leanings. He was a journalist and a political activist and very active in promoting Romanian knowledge in Italy and in Europe and so on. And when started the Congress in Prague, Vegetzi Ruscalla addressed a letter to Palatsky from Turin in which he tied the Italian national problem to those of Central Europe. He wrote, "You want to escape the unreasonable German hegemony, as we do. You want Poland to belong to the Poles, the land of the Czech to belong to the Czech, Illyria to belong to the Illyrians." And he pledged to use his forces to make known in Italy, said Ruscalla, to make known in Italy your rights of the Slavs, the acts of unacceptable domination which waits upon you in order to establish a great confederation of free Slavic nations. Finally, to make you do justice in the opinion of Italy, to secure all our sympathies, and to procure you an ally against the invasions of these German raids. The focus, in the words of Ruscalla, is mainly on Germany, meaning by the term German hegemony also the Austrian hegemony. Already in Ruscalla, in short, emerges the special position of Italy and its inability to adhere to Palatsky program, so oriented on Austria's reformist options. Paradoxically, Liebert and Bakunin were ideally closer to Ruscalla, with their anti-absolutist approach. For the latter, in particular, Slavic unity, Slavic freedom, the rebirth of the Slavs are not possible except through the destruction of the Austrian Empire. This is how Tamborra summarized the conclusions of the Prague Congress. I think Tamborra. Slavic unity versus Germanic unity, at least in intentions, but together precisely because of the radical and evolutionary character assumed by the Prague meeting, with this precise will to escape a particularism that draws directives from Petersburg, denies the effective equality of all Slavic peoples and bears the autocratic freedom-suppressing seal of the Tsarist Russia. End of the citation. On this topic, a point of reference remains the work dedicated to the Prague Congress on the occasion of its first centenary in 1948 by another distinguished Italian Slavist, Wolfgango Giusti, who focuses his attention on the Czech component, seeing its distance from the Polish one, which was critical towards the academic risorgimento of the so-called Little Slavic peoples, who were not compelled, as the Poles, to break, first of all, the Austro-Russian pincer in which the latter had been placed. As Giusti analyzes well, Russians always looked split in three main orientations. The first one, a generic feeling of Slavic unity, that however did not recognize equal rights to the other Slavisms. The second one, a Slavophilism, basically acquiescence to the Tsar's expansive programs. And third, a radicalism subordinating the Slavic issue to a more general and utopian revolution, except for intellectuals as Herzen or Bakunin, who, however, remained almost isolated in their time and also beyond. For Giusti, for both Giusti, the Congress was a resounding failure, while Tamborra rectifies this view, insisting on the cultural ethos that followed the Congress. It is interesting to note today the connection between old and new Russian panslavism, noted already by Giusti when he wrote about the Prague Congress in the aftermath of World War II. The victory, wrote Giusti, the victory strengthened in Russia the consciousness to be a great power and the will to realize all possible rights at a strategic, military and economic level. Two myths of strength, two different and opposite traditions thus came to be intertwined and fused into a new will. In short, from this curious and unexpected fusion of ideologies and values arose the new Slavism. It reveals complex and interesting features. In fact, ethnographically, it relates back to the federalism of Michael Bakunin and Alexander Herzen, while leaning on the more rigid political and economic centralism. So, Giusti. In conclusion, Giusti wondered if the heated rivalries and ancient contrasts manifested in Prague would still be destined to return, maybe under unpredictable and unsuspected aspects. And our reflection is that considering the space it devotes to the routine Ukrainian question, we must say today, unfortunately, yes. However, we still must assess the meaning of the Italian position as it emerges from the brief mentions we have dedicated to Vegetsi Ruskala. Italy's position was a difficult one, a sympathy for the Romanian brothers alongside the Slavs, but also for the Magyars, insofar as they were seen as potential anti-Habsburg allies. And, for that matter, Italy's calculations and conveniences are well clarified by the participation of the Kingdom of Sardinia, in West Piedmont, in the Crimean War, exactly against Russia, which was responsible for the Vienna system blocking the Italian unification. Giulia Lamy, in her History of Eastern Europe, emphasized this aspect several times, considering that in Italy, beyond the political strategic profits that any reopening of the traditional Eastern question could offer, already existed a discrete knowledge of Eastern Europe, formed over the time. Thanks to the relations that the various Italian states endowed with their own articulated diplomacy had had with that area over centuries. But between the conservative order period and 1848, both liberals and Democrats looked to the East. To Magyars, surely, to Romanians, because they were engaged in the struggle against Austria and Turkey. To Greeks, because of the long cultural tradition supposed to be common. But above all, to the composite Slavic world, starting with the Poles, with whom there was a traditional relationship since the 18th century, and the widespread sympathy uniting liberals and Democrats, Catholics and secularists. Aggregating the enemies of the Habsburg was the hidden truth for many of those projects. We can cite the case of Cesare Balbo, another intellectual from the liberal right wing of the Kingdom of Sardinia. And in his work, Dell'Esperanza d'Italia, on Italy's hopes in 1844, Balbo advocated the thesis of Austrian orientation towards East to relieve their pressure on Italy, thus encouraging its competition with Russia. There are also the opinions and judgments by the Catholic world, by the Holy See, with not many attention to the Poles because of the revolutionary meaning involved in the Polish cause for the Holy See. And not surprisingly, Niccolò Tommaseo, in his work on Italy, published during his exile in France in 1835, stigmatized in harshest terms the attitude of Pope Gregory XVI, calling him the allied of sovereigns for failing to defend the rights of the oppressed Poles. But not even Pius IX, after some initial openings, transferred his interest in Poland onto the political plane. And there are other liberal Catholics, such as Pellico, Gioberti, made no secret of their sympathy for the Poles, even if their support was almost exclusively on a moral level. Gioberti, for example, saw Poland as a key country, capable of leading the Slavic peoples, playing a mediating role between the Holy See and the Orthodox Slavs. The widespread fear was that Russian Pahlavis would succeed in uniting around the politically reactionary and religiously anti-Catholic Tsarist empire all the Slavic peoples that were finally aroused. The main problem was to establish which project these fresh, young energies could enjoy. Gioberti himself, when he was briefly in charge of the Sardinian government, by the end of 48 and the beginning of 49, set up a courageous policy towards Central and Eastern Europe, hoping to push Hungarians, in agreement with the Polish emigration, to leave their obstinate attitudes towards minorities. Let us remember, moreover, that they were precisely the Poles, both the democratic and conservative wings, who fought on all the Italian fronts during the revolutionary year 1848. From General Ludwig Miloslavski in Sicily against the Bourbons to General Czarnowski in Piedmont against the Austrians, and so on. In short, a long-standing and highly significant convergence of ideas and interests between Italians and Poles. Then we have the liberals, such as Cavour, D'Azeglio. Also, they saw the Slavs as possible defenders of the noble cause of nationhood and freedom, and were worried that this game might be played in Russia's favor, even though the international context obliged the little Piedmont to keep unofficial its contacts with the Slavic world. In general, with the Danubian Balkan area, so as not to arouse the suspicion of Russia and the other powers, and to not appear by the same side of the forces of the so-called International of the Revolution. This was closely tied to the Democrats, who always cultivated relations with the Europeans emigrated. And in the democratic side, the great inspirer and supporter of these relations was undoubtedly Giuseppe Mazzini, who combined democratic militancy with a great theoretical work, in which the thought about nation and freedom was fundamental to the Italian Risorgimento and to similar movements throughout Europe. See, for example, the network of secret societies that arose on the model of Giovine Italia, Young Italy, both in the Slavic countries, from Poland, the Young Poland, to Serbia, the Young Serbia, and in non-Slavic countries such as Hungary and Romania. It was an initial connection of points, united by an ideal bond, which, even if concerned by expected national rivalries, would create a common framework on a European scale. And the contribution to the thought and the action offered by the democratic movement in all its articulations would prove to be very important for the countries that want to carry out their own Risorgimento, as would the military support of in the following years, the support of Garibaldi's volunteers, the so-called Garibaldini, to foreign liberation movements in various circumstances and over a long period of time. The time is
5 minutes.
Even that, okay. And I would like just to come back about an interesting case concerning Giuseppe Mazzini, because it seems very clear, very important in our opinion. Because all of this had already emerged a few years before 1848 in the Italian political culture, thus becoming one of its distinctive features. The example of Mazzini judgments towards the Croatian Ludovic Gali, expressed in some of his writings, are very, very illuminating. Mazzini did not accept that one could collaborate with the Habsburgs to protect the rights of a nationality. Facing the cultural and political opposition between Magyars and Croats in the Hungarian Diet in Bratislava during the 40s, for example, the Emperor, Ferdinand I, allowed the temporary and limited use of Latin in the Diet, as requested by Croats, granted the possibility of using Croatian language in the Sabor, and the use of the term Illyrian was allowed again by the Emperor, although only in the literary sphere. And the price to be paid to the Vienna government for these concessions, which gave hope of future greater autonomy for Croatia, was a commitment to not contrasting the Habsburgs. So Mazzini, when in 849 the Croats sided with Austria against the revolutionary Hungary, and his judgment of this political strategy was harsh. And he did not hesitate to condemn it together with the man who had been one of its main ideologists, Ludovic Gali. In his Slavic letters, published in 1857, while recognizing the national importance of the Croatian scholars' cultural work, Mazzini did not hesitate to call him a traitor and a coward. These statements can be better understood by reading some unpublished notes by Mazzini. They are kept in the modern library of history, modern history library in Rome. These notes are dating back to the years immediately after 48, in which he notes, I cite Mazzini, in 1845, Dr. Gali, earning in Vienna some illusory concessions for Croatia, gave a promise that the Croatian deputies in the Hungarian Diet would support the policy of Austrian Conservative Party. Immorality. This is the judgment of Mazzini of this political strategy. Immorality. So it is easy to understand how the two perspectives were opposite, not only from a planning point of view, as in the case of the Sardinian government, which wished a collaboration with the Hungarians, but also from an intellectual point of view, as just mentioned in the case of Giuseppe Mazzini. Few voices raised in defense of the motivations for an alliance of the Slavs of the Habsburg monarchy with the Italian national movement. Wolf Giusti, in his study already mentioned by Giulia Rami and myself, pointed out the interesting attempt to involve also Italians and Romanians in the Prague Congress. The purpose of such a motion was to associate with the Slavs the forces of two peoples who might appear threatened. The first, Italians, by Germanic expansionism. The second, Romanians, by Magyar expansionism. A collaboration with the restless and revolutionary Italy, the enemy of the Habsburgs, however, could seem too dangerous and might immediately irritate the imperial authorities. So maybe this could be a reason because Italians and Romanians did not collaborate to the works of the Prague Congress. And the Savoy expansionist project found an ideal practice in the Romanian national unification some years later, not in the collaboration with the Austrian Slavs, thanks to the transversal support, as we know, of Napoleon III's France, according to an anti-Austrian viewpoint. I go with the conclusion, and In any case, this intertwined history of the Italian national movement and that of the Slavs in the Habsburg monarchy, together with the Italian historiography that has dealt with those events, shows the European significance of the process of state building in Italy and the national rise of Slavic peoples. Both, despite different views as we have seen, were the roots of a long process of modern national identities affirmation and the elaboration of a political ideology based on the national dimension. This was a contribution to the foundation of contemporary Europe, which precisely from 1848 onwards was changing itself from an imperial space into a group of different nation states where we still live and to which our lives are closely tied even today. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much to both of you for a very interesting paper. I suggest that we go straight away and give our next speaker. I'm going to introduce him. Yes, and then we may have a few minutes for a comment at the end of the session. Now, our next speaker is Professor Piotr Slanta, who is the director of the Scientific Center of the Polish Academy of Sciences in Vienna and teaches modern history at the University of Warsaw. He specializes in the 19th century international relations, colonialism, German-Polish relations in the 19th and 20th centuries, the First World War, and Eastern European modern history. He has recently published Der Polenfresser gegen die Reichsfeinde Kaiser Wilhelm II und die Polen 1888 to 1918, the Polish eater against the enemies of the Reich, Kaiser Wilhelm II and the Poles 1888 to 1918, Wiesbaden, Harasowitz Verlag 2022. So, Professor Santa, please go ahead and give your report.
Thank you very much for introduction. Myself, I moment. So here we are. So thank you very much for having me here for the introduction. So first of all, I have to confess that Professor Lübke asked me to...
Sorry to interrupt you. But did you mean slave or Slav?
Slav, of course.
Okay, so that's the mistake.
I made it 15 minutes ago.
Yeah, okay.
Honestly speaking, so thank you for your correction. Of course.
Sorry.
So I have to confess, when Professor Lübke asked me if I would like to come here, I wonder what I can say about the springtime of nations. I decided maybe I would can present this state of research on that topic in Poland, and very soon I regret that decision, because state of research on the spring of nations is quite disappointing in Poland. And I hope you will not after my paper. Yes, at the end of my paper, I will try to ask why we Polish historians are not so deep interested in this period. So to this day, the most To this day, the most comprehensive, for over 1,800 pages, 5 volumes, study of springtime of nation is this collective study written by more than a dozen researchers, monograph published on the centenary of the revolution in the years 1948-1953. The size of this war remains quite impressive, but the content is outdated, and from the very beginning it's steeped in Marxist ideology. The studies included both Polish and pan-European issues. Naturally, a question arose: why exactly in post-war Poland, only 3 years after the end of the Second World War, state institutions invested so much money and effort to prepare and publish such impressive study in such a large number, 5,000 copies? It's quite easy to explain, according to me. Namely, new authorities imposed on Poland by USSR, authorities which had not been elected in a democratic parliamentary election and were unpopular, if not hated, by the greatest part of the Polish society, needed to invent a new tradition and Marxist legitimization to rule. Period of social and political upheavals, uprising, revolutions all over the Europe, occurrences in which Polish generals and soldiers played an important role, only to mention generals Józef Bem and Mirosławski, seems fit that purpose. The revolution of 1848 was an example of the struggle of the broader social strata against absolutism, the struggle for freedom and democracy. The slogan of the Slavic Federation promoted at the Congress fit well with the communistic slogan of the Brotherhood of Peoples promoted by the USSR. As we can read in editorial of the volume 4, I quote, "It should be stressed that alongside patriotism and democratism, this ideology is characterized by revolutionary internationalism, a deep solidarity with the people fighting for freedom, in particular, a desire for alliance with the Russian revolutionaries, the most beautiful symbol of which was Warsaw friendship with Herzl, Warsaw, one of the Polish socialist politician. Quotation ends. Center of Revolution gave also a unique chance to link Polish history, or the history of the Polish fighting for the establishment of independent state, to the history of international revolutionary movement. One should not forget also that in 1948, Marx and Engels published the Communistic Manifest, proclaiming the birth of new era. For all of this reason, Polish communist dissidents so willingly invoke heritage of the revolution 1848. But in this book, there are only literally 6 sentences on the Slav Congress. So Czech demanded autonomy and it agreed to maintain within the Austrian monarchy, being dominated by Germans. They looked for potential allies for defending the national rights. It was the reason of convoking the Congress. From the very beginning, its participants presented different opinions on key issue, what was not good forecast for the result of the Congress sitting. It was difficult to predict the result of the Congress if it would not be dispersed by military intervention. And that's all. Yeah, the half of the pageant. Quite impressive, isn't it? But if I could for a while digress from the main topic of my speech and refer to the title of this panel, Science, Political Ideas and Afterlife of the Congress, I would like to add that publishing of this series was part of centennial celebration of revolution. Here you can see the picture from the opening of exhibition on revolution 1848 in Museum of the Polish Military in Warsaw in 1948. So, another confession, I have to admit I have a problem with what is hidden under the expression digital history. So when I was sitting in the train heading Prague from Vienna yesterday, I found answer. So I asked myself how many streets and public square in Poland bear the name of the spring of the nation. So I asked Google Maps. So it was the first step into the digital humanities. And it turned out that there is about 20 cities in Poland which have a street in the name of Spring of Nation, and smaller number of cities with the public square. So it's also quite impressive, and the most of this city lies in the western part of Poland, in Great Poland, in the former Prussian Poland, and came to the fighting between the Polish insurgents and the Prussian army. The most popular, the most famous in Poland Spring of Time Square is located in Poznań. It was renamed exactly in 1948, so before that, this one of the main squares in Poznań was in the name of President Hoover. President Hoover was very engaged in the relief for the starving population of Central Europe after the First World War, and this square was named after President Hoover. We have also a square in Warsaw till now. And it was a Stalinist period, 1948, yeah? A communistic party was taking the whole power in Poland. And it was not good, I think, inconvenient for the communistic party that the square place is called after American president. And with quite astonishing, I also discovered that there is a street, Spring of Nation street in Warsaw, pretty close to me. And this city was renamed in 1979, and I wonder why. I think that the answer is quite simply. 3 years ago, in Ursus tractor factory came a huge riots and strike, anti-communist strike, and these workers went through the street unity of workers, was the name of this unity, and after 3 years I think that the communist strike blurred the memory of this strike, and this city was renamed. So back from the digital humanistic to the historiography. Also linked to the anniversary celebrations is the book titled Ideological Phase of Springtime of Nation, written by Stanisław Kieniewicz and published also in 1948. According to him, Czechs were looking for support in their fight to defend national rights, and so decided to convene the Slavic Congress. From the very beginning, the Polish delegates at the Congress tried to solve the Slavic issue not only within Austrian border, but on a much wider European level. They wanted not only to rebuild along national and liberal lines the Habsburg monarchy, but generally the whole continent. This attempt failed, mostly because Czech delegates evaded this revolutionary and anti-Russian tendency. Thanks to these alleged indecisive and wise tactics, General Wittgenstein would suppress the Prague uprising, disperse the Slavic Congress, and introduce military rule in Bohemia. The Poles tried to mediate between the Slovaks and Serbs on one hand and Hungarians on the other. For this reason, they were also accused of lacking of Slavic solidarity. Till now, the most popular monograph on 1848 revolution used by the students at universities are also this also book from Sławomir Kalenka. You can see this cover of this monograph on the slide. He presented a review of the main occurrences in Europe during revolutionary upheavals. It's still most important compendium of knowledge about the revolution published in Polish, so more than 30 years ago. So he described the Slavic Congress very concisely on merely 3 pages. Okay, 4. Underlying the Austro-Slavic conception of Czech delegates, so it's far from being deep analysis of that problem. The only monograph on the Slavic Congress was published nearly a century ago in Lviv, Lemberg. Its title was Slavic Congress in Lviv in 1848 and the Polish Cause. And his author, Władysław Tadeusz Wisłocki, devoted the most space in this space to the Polish question. In the introduction, he wrote explicitly that the purpose of this work was to refute the accusation against our grandparents. As he put also, so after the First World War, on the political map of Europe appeared a few new Slavic countries as Poland, Czechoslovakia, and Yugoslavia, and he wished to explain to European public opinion the genesis of this state. So Wisłocki's work is polemical in nature. He rejects accusation that the Polish delegates to the Congress deliberately sabotage his work, bear responsibility for failure and the bloodshed in Prague. It was in the interest of the Poles to bring the Congress to the happy end, if only to popularize the demand for the restoration of independent Poland. I quote, "We did not therefore endanger the life of the Congress," he quotes ends, he wrote in conclusion. So after the Congress fiasco, the Poles were said to be planning to convene another Slavic Congress, this time in Krakow. All Polish historians dealing with the Slavic Congress stress that the Ukrainians modeled themselves on the Czech national movement, because many other authors which I would like to mention, how much time I have? 5 minutes? 10?
Well, you can have another 5.
5, thank you very much. So, like the Czech, Ukrainians showed loyalty to the Habsburg dynasty. The Ukrainian or Ruthenian delegates were primarily concerned with demonstrating on the international stage their separateness from the Poles and the existence of the separate Ruthenian national with its own aspiration. The Poles of Galicia were to be alien to the idea of Austro-Slavism, since Galicia was to be fully annexed and restored to the restored Polish state, and its affiliation to Austria was to be temporal. In the 1970s, the problem of the Polish-Ukrainian relation in the middle of the 19th century was addressed by Jan Kozik. He tried to explain the causes the causes, the course and the consequences of the reunion of the both sides of the Polish-Ukrainian agreement from the 7th June, concluded here in Prague. Stressing that the departure of the Ukrainian delegation to Prague allowed them to appear on the international arena, strengthen the position of Ukrainians in relation to the Poles in Galicia, and greatly accelerated the process of forming the Ukrainian national consciousness. What the Slavic Congress concerned, Marian Stolarczyk, in his book on activity of Central National Committee in Lviv-Lemberg, published in Rzeszów in 1994, concentrated on efforts to conclude the Polish-Ukrainian and the Polish-Czech agreement during the Slavic Congress. As he argued, the critical aim of the Polish delegates in Prague was not constitutional reform of the Danube monarchy, but the rebuilding of independent Poland. This conflicted with Czech plans to bring about the federalization of Austria and to work out a settlement of Polish peoples living there so as to prevent the incorporation of Bohemia into the German nation state. The separation of Galicia from Austria would have undermined the chances of Palacky federation plans and put in doubt whether the Slavs would remain the majority in the new Austria, according to Slavic conception. The adoption of Austrian federalization plans would have meant giving up the dream of rebuilding of independent and united Poland, and nobody knows Polish patriots would ready to do that. So pro-Russian and anti-Hungarian sympathies prevailed among Czech delegates, as well as those from other Slavic nations. So the majority of the Polish delegates stood for a different position. On the one hand, they saw Russians as the main enemies of the Polishness and generally slavehood, rather than the Slav allies in the struggle for their rights in Austria. On the other hand, because of traditional Polish-Hungarian friendship, Polish delegates appealed to the Slovaks and Serbs to reach an agreement with the Hungarian authorities. The Polish delegates advocate the right of the nation to the self-determination and to the peaceful solution of the national disputes. They hope also to establish trade relations and cooperation with the Czechs in Prague. I show you that only not to present you the cover of the books. You know, that's a leaflet from after 1849, so contemporary map of Austria. Apart from the agreement with the Czech, from the Polish perspective, the second most important task in Prague was to conclude a settlement with, according to Stolarczyk, with Ukrainians, Ruthenians. The Ukrainians, fearing the domination of the Polish culture and threat of Polonization, were in favor of dividing Galicia into two provinces based on religion and leaving Galicia in Austria. The Poles were in favor of linguistic and cultural equality, but against a division of Galicia into two provinces. 2 minutes. Yes, sir. According to Stolarczyk, the results of Slavic Congress were a success of Poles. The delegates came back home with conviction that an understanding, even in the most problematic thorny issue, was possible, but the reality was different. According to Stolarczyk, he wrote this in conclusion, that chances for the lasting Polish-Czech agreement has been missed. The Polish-Ukrainian antagonism was on the rise in the next decades. Also in Polish-Czech relations, the place of friendship and mutual help was taken over by indifference and in time hostility, which ended in the war in 1890. So regarding the independence. So according to researcher of the younger generation, Adam Świątek, the Slavic Congress found a special place in Polish and Ukrainian history. No other fact of Czech history in the 19th century arose such interest among Polish scholars. It was also an important moment for the crystallization of the Polish-Ukrainian relation. For the Ruthenians, participation in Congress was the first and foremost an opportunity to strengthen the position of the Ruthenian National Committee, so main council in Lviv, and to demonstrate to the other Slavs the existence of the Ruthenian nation. So Poles try to ignore this movement and rely on people defining themselves Gene Rutheni Natione Polonii, so Poles with Ruthenian roots, or many delegates, for example, Prince Leon Sapieha called himself Ruthenian because he lives in the Ruthenia, so it's in the eastern part of Galicia, because he wasn't Greek Catholic. He probably speak a little bit Ukrainian, but he was from the birth 100% Poles. To sum up, how can this lack of interest in researching the 1848 revolution be explained. In my opinion, it's only my hypothesis, of course, by the relatively small and unspectacular course of the revolution on the Polish territories. Half joking, half seriously, we both like bloody encounters, battles, pictures, charge, defending fortress, uprising, or a lot of the tactic is fighting with the enemy, which are much stronger than we are. So, meeting of 350 males in the Middle Ages in Prague seems quite boring, I suppose. So, anyway, there is a lot to do still on that field. I wish to go back to my own research. So, thank you very much for your attention.
Paper, and I'd like to thank all three participants. And now we can open the floor. But may I just take the opportunity to say two things about it? I was struck always how Adam Mickiewicz can start his Pan Tadeusz with, Litwo ojczyzno moja. When obviously, I mean, he was Polish and so on, but it all makes sense. This one. Now, the other thing, before I give the floor to everybody, is there should be no surprise about how Marx and Engels felt about a lot of these peoples in Eastern Europe. Because they took, of course, the quote-unquote progressive view that certain peoples like, the Magyars in particular and so forth, were on the side of progress and future, whereas some peoples like the Croats and the others were, opposed to it. And obviously, this is not the first time that future communists had trouble with Marx and Engels. As you know, I mean, they had a terrible time explaining why the first proletarian revolution took place in Russia, which of all of the countries could not be seen as a leader, a vanguard of any, capitalist society and whatnot. So, there was a lot of mental gymnastics, I would call it, on the part of these people, and one of them was, of course, how to interpret the 1848-49 revolution in general, and the Prague Slav Congress in particular. But with that, let's open the floor to everyone. Please, ask questions. Directly to the not
I have a question about the Italian topics, because here there's topic about Russia, Poland, Italians, but what about the closest Slavs to Italians in Istria and Dalmatia, so the territories which were treated as the part of Italian national territory? Is that a topic? Was it a topic in 40s, or it is only future problems for Italians?
No, during the Risorgimento there were not a main topic about the Slavs of Istria and Dalmatia.
I'm talking about that there's a minority there.
But after the Italian unification, there was a big project to include in the Italian national state also the territories of the other part of the area. During the Risorgimento, the collaboration, the projects, for example, in 48-49 was mainly with Serbs, with Romanians and Hungarians, but this nothing with as I don't know.
Okay, so until 70s, there's no topic of Dalmatia history?
Not particularly.
Okay,
because in my opinion, judging from the Italian Costituenda Italia, the problem was to find some organized allies in order to fight with Austria. So the problem was Magyar or Polish connection. and the Romanian connection, if you want, for idea of Latin brotherhood. So the discourse on Dalmatia and Croatia is on the side. After the unification, the problem of controlling the Adriatic became an issue in our foreign politics. But since after the unification we entered in the alliance with Austria and Germany, the problem is frozen until the First World War. This is my interpretation.
It's basic, but also if you, I looked actually at the secret documents from the Ministry of Internal Affairs in Vienna as to what the situation was in Dalmatia and in Istria. And in 1865, before the outbreak of the war with Italy in 1866 and so forth, they were extremely worried, and they, of all the things, said that the Italians tried to infiltrate, to send their spies and their agents to the whole of the eastern Adriatic coast, meaning from Trieste, which at that time was, of course, Austrian, all the way down to Bocca di Catarogno, to the Bay of Kotor and so forth, in the guise of operatic companies. They were sending these, opera companies to sing Italian operas, in places like Split and Dubrovnik and so forth, because of, the great appeal of Italian culture, particularly to the upper classes, the elites, and so forth. And so they, all of the military commanders were given special orders to investigate and, if necessary, forcibly, throw them out of the Austrian Empire. In other words, force them to leave if they proved to be subversive and so forth. And, this was something before, of course, the great clash, as you know, the Battle of Vis or Lissa in 1866, in which, Deggendorf, defeated the Italian fleet and which stopped the Italian expansion until the First World War. Of course, it did not make it go away. So, but enough for me. Anybody else? Yeah.
I would like to mention a letter by Tommaseo. As you know, Tommaseo was an Italian from Šibenik, and during 48 and 49, he was mediating an alliance between the Republic of Venice, where he was involved, with Hungary. And there was not the same opinions about the Adriatic and the Dalmatian. And Tommaseo said, okay, let's collaborate, but later we'll discuss about the future of Istria and so on.
No, go ahead. Please ask other questions. Yes, go ahead.
I have a question to Professor Slanta and maybe some comment. What do you think, when the history of 1848 start be a historical problem? When is the end of thinking about revolution as a problem of contemporary policy? When is the start of the showing revolutionary event as a historical moment, historical problem? My comment, in my opinion, I see that it's when last witnesses who observe or take part died. And I know the book from 1914 is a book written by Kazimierz Staszewski-Balański, journalist from Lviv, who wrote a work, 1848, wrote in English, Year of Illusions. It's some kind of historical story about 1848. After the First World War, I think this was wrote in this book, and it's study, a serious study, historical study. So in my opinion, it's about First World War, but what do you think?
So I would agree with that. They have to think about this question. Of course, the last witness partitions of these occurrences died on the eve of the 19th and on the eve of the 20th century. But even in the interwar period, so this part of the history was not especially popular among Polish historians. So paradoxically, the communists gave the incentive to study that. Then, because the anti-communistic stance of the Polish society was quite unpopular, so this book of Sławomir Kaleta published in 1991. But of course, it was already after the fall of communism. But I presume that he started his work at the end of the 1880s, so the last element of this historiography. And there is quite on. Besides the small articles, there is no monographs on that publishing forward. So I don't know if my attempt to answer is satisfying for you, but I will think about that.
Well, I suppose we've run out of time, so we'd like to thank all of you again for being present here, and to our three participants, for their interesting papers. So let's have